Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch our YouTube channel and like this show as well as all of our others on Gracefully Graying. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing a book written by Virginia Hartunian called Orphan in the Stands, which is really very fascinating and enlightening and in many respects, very sad book. Virginia, welcome to Gracefully Graying. First of all, after reading your book, I feel that I know you and your mother at least a little bit. But why don't you tell our viewers exactly what prompted you to write Orphan in the Sands?
When I started my master's degree at Open University, Dr. Harry Hahn gave us an assignment to write a story. And an idea flashed in my head when I was thinking about what to write about. And I remembered when I was 9 years old, we had a Michigan basement, and I was going through the junk, and I found this small brown suitcase. And I ran upstairs to show my mother, and she was always angry, and she told me it's dusty and dirty. Put it back down. And it was her only possession in coming to America. And so it was then I decided to write a story about her life. And I ran home and I found the suitcase in her closet. And when I opened it up, there were the documents proving that she was a survivor of the 1915 Armenian genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Turks.
And I know this was a tragic time, and it seems to me your mother had a very tragic life. Why don't you tell our viewers, give us a bird's eye view as to her life from your perspective and also from hers?
Yes. Well, she never told anyone her story because she said no one likes to hear a sad story. But she lived 50 miles south of the Black Sea in ancient Armenia, which in the late 1160s was invaded by the barbaric Seljuk Turks, and they took over Armenia, and for the rest of that time, the Armenians became victims to the Turks. So on a hot July morning in 1915, the Turkish soldiers with rifles broke down her door. She was having breakfast with her mother, older brother, and baby sister. Her father had died a year earlier. They did not know what was happening. They had to line up on the dirt road while their other relatives and Armenians had to line up. And the soldiers yelled out, "Yuri, Yuri, Gavors," which means walk, walk, damned infidels. And the Turks did not like the Armenians because they were Christians and the Turks were Muslims. So they began to walk, and my mother at first thought she was going on a field trip. But they walked without water or food for a day, and near evening they had to sleep on the ground. The next morning when she heard bullets, she knew they were going to kill her. So they continued marching, and there were so many people shoving and pushing that my mother let go of her mother's hand. Her mother was carrying the baby, and she couldn't find her mother again. And because of no water or food, she fell to the ground. She was very weak and sick. And this childless Turkish man told the soldier to give her to him. And he did not carry her. She had to walk with him to his home. He was kind to her, but his wife was abusive. She didn't want to take care of my mother. And my mother did not understand Turkish. So one day, she asked her for a hammer. And when my mother didn't respond, in her anger, she grabbed the hammer and hit my mother over the head. And my mother couldn't cry because she would hit her again. So she burned some rags and put it over the wound on her head. And she made her promise not to tell the father. If you're interested in learning about the rest of the story, read Orphan in the Sands.
And this is the book here. I'm holding it up. I don't know if it can be seen on the screen, and the front cover is a picture of an orphan in the sands, and the back cover has a picture of Victoria, your mother, and you, Virginia Hartunian. Were you shocked, Virginia, when your mother revealed her upbringing to you on your trip to Ellis Island? And for our viewers, your mother really didn't travel, but at some point in her life, the two of you went to New York and you visited Ellis Island. So tell us what happened.
Yes, my mother had cancer of the trachea, and the doctor at UVM put me aside and said, you might ask your mother what she would like to do. And not knowing my mother's story, she wanted to go to Ellis Island. And at that time, it was dilapidated. And I said, Ellis Island, why don't we go to California? She said, no, I have to go to Ellis Island. So in one day, I drove her to Ellis Island, and the librarian there, Barry Marino, who is still there, greeted us. And when they took us to Ellis Island, the guide asked, well, I'll tell that later, but when my mother, we sat in the great hall on the bench, and she started telling me her story, I was shocked and horrified. And then I felt guilty because I always wanted to run away from my mother. She always put me down. And after I learned this, I had a completely different attitude toward my mom. And I felt like because she put me down so much and because she was negative, I felt like she didn't like me. And as growing up, I didn't like her. And learning about her life changed me completely.
Your mother was scarred for life. And, you know, what's interesting for our viewers, Ellis Island, especially the 20s, 30s, 40s, and I guess even more recently, was the gateway for people coming from various countries, whether Europe or Asia or Africa, to the United States. And this was the place where they were either allowed in or rejected. And I think that's an important part of our history and an important part of your mother's life as well as yours. Now, Virginia, your book is autobiographical as well. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about how you are and how really you were influenced by your mother, really,
Yes.
and her horrible childhood and life?
Well, I learned about that when I started to take therapy with Dr. Kenneth Pitts, who worked with children of genocide and Holocaust survivors for many years. And that's how I learned about this. My book, Orphan in the Sands, Dr. Jane Bingham, who is my professor at Oak University, said, my book is an annotated bibliography. My mother was born in ancient Armenia, which is called Turkey today, and I was born in America. My first language was Armenian. All I spoke before I went to elementary school was Armenian, and I was born in America. My first language was Armenian. I ate Armenian food, followed Armenian values, but upon entering junior high, I began to notice the American culture and the way the American kids lived and what they did. And I wanted to be like my American girlfriends. I respected my parents so much that I had to follow their beliefs. What bothered me the most, that I had to go everywhere with them, even in high school. I had to go and visit their friends. I could not go to basketball games or date in school. And I felt like an outcast. I felt like I was very different than my friends, and I was not allowed to develop my personality. And as a result, in my isolation, the piano became my best friend. And even though I was born in America, I followed my mother's footsteps.
How hard was it growing up with your mother to survive the Armenian Holocaust? I know you followed her footsteps, and I read in the book that, you know, you were very talented as far as a pianist, and you went to the University of Michigan School of Music?
It was very hard growing up with my mother, who survived the Armenian genocide, because I didn't know anything about it. She was beautiful and smart, and I didn't think she was smart at that time because she was from the old country, and the people from the old country didn't fit into the American way of life. My mother was very negative, cold, and critical about everything I said and did. She made me feel like I was bad. And whenever I tried to talk and let her know how I felt, it was like talking to the wall. She never understood. No response, no encouragement. Eventually, I gave up talking to her, and I refused to help her in the kitchen or housework. And whenever I would get sad and depressed, I would run directly to the piano. It felt like she didn't like me and I didn't like her.
Virginia, do you think that your mother ever found happiness in her lifetime?
Yes, my mother found happiness when I took her to Ellis Island. And when I wrote her story, she said, nobody has a story like my story. And when she recovered from trachea cancer, I took her to Ellis Island. The guide said to our group, do you know anyone who went through Ellis Island? My mother shot her hand up in the air and she was jumping up and down like a teenager. And it was the first time I saw her animated. When the guide called on her, she said, pointing to the room on the 3rd floor, I stayed in that room for 2.5 months.
Wow. I know that she had a hard time coming in, and she had relatives who finally helped her. And, the story is fascinating. It really is. Virginia, was it hard for you to come to grips with how your life was impacted by your mother's? Because it clearly was impacted heavily.
Yes, it took many, many, many years with therapy, with a psychiatrist, and I wasn't going to quit. I continued until I felt I was healing. It was a blessing to come to grips with how my life was impacted by my mother's life. My mother had to shut down her feelings to survive the Armenian genocide. She loved me, the therapist said, but could not show affection. She did not hug, kiss, or shower me with encouragement. Like my mother, I learned not to feel or show affection. Like my mother, I had low esteem. My mother would occasionally say that she felt like a nobody, and I felt like a nobody. Like my mother, I was lonely and I had difficulty with relationships. Years of therapy with the psychiatrist who specialized in working with children of genocide and Holocaust survivors, I eventually started to heal. My mother and I had a loving relationship in her last 17 years. Orphan in the Sands is about the evolution of dark despair to the liberation of the human spirit. Our past is the key to our present.
What's memorable and what struck me was the fact that truly not only was your mother an orphan in the stand, but you were as well. And that's brought up very fully in the book. Virginia, reflecting back, what was most memorable about your childhood and upbringing for our viewers? What do you think?
Well, I was very fortunate. My father was a survivor of the genocide, but he was older and he was not on the death march. He saw the Turks take his father while he was playing in the street, and they took him away and poisoned him. But my father had a more positive attitude. And this was the time when World War II was starting, and my parents didn't have any money, and my mother was against my father buying a piano or giving me piano lessons. And I was so happy because my father bought a piano, a secondhand piano, and paid for my piano lessons.
So really, the piano was really a very significant part of your childhood and the piano lessons.
Yes, and I became addicted to music.
Well, it's a wonderful thing to be addicted to. I mean, that's for sure. This is a tough question, but I'll ask it anyways. If you could change your life, what would you do?
I would, everything, I had wonderful parents, I had wonderful education, I had wonderful career, but I missed out with relationships because I was frozen. I was inhibited about expressing affection. And if I had to go back, that is the one thing that I would like to be able to do, which I feel I'm better now. But in relationships, I always severed when the relationship was becoming too serious.
Now, you're gracefully graying, clearly. May I ask how old you are now?
86.
Well, you are as sharp as a tack, that's for sure. And
Thank you.
I hope you have many, many more fruitful years ahead of you.
Thank you.
You know, I know the Armenian Holocaust was slaughtered by the Turks, and if I'm not mistaken, there were over 1 million Armenians who were slaughtered by.
1.5 million. And excuse me, Raphael Lemkin coined the word genocide for the Armenian genocide in 1944.
And I think there are a lot of parallels between the Jews and the Holocaust, where 6 million were slaughtered by the Nazis and those who assisted them. Do you have any thoughts about these parallels? And I don't know, you said the psychiatrist you went to dealt with survivors of the Holocaust, so I imagine there were Jewish survivors as well as Armenian survivors.
Yes, and I lost my thought there. Hitler said, "Who remembers the extermination of the Armenians?" And he used the genocide as a prototype to carry out the Holocaust.
I'm sure. What tragic. And what the name of religion and the name of ethnic cleansing, whatever the excuse for, just human barbarity that is almost unimaginable. Virginia, what is the main message that you would like to leave with your readers and with our viewers, quite frankly?
Well, I wanted to raise the consciousness of the readers, which is invisible, really, about how survivors, the scars of their emotional injuries, can be passed down to their children. And I was very fortunate. This dietitian from U of M referred me to Dr. Pitts. Otherwise, I would never learn how I was affected by the Armenian genocide. And many children of survivors are not aware that they inherited the post-traumatic stress disorder, and they are unaware of it. And unless you get help from a therapist, you cannot learn about it. And that's how I learned about it. Changed my life.
I'm sure. And these are important words to share, because I know there are still many, many Holocaust survivors, whether it's the Armenian Holocaust or the Holocaust of the Jews and others. And these are such important words. I mean, without help, the stress and the trauma is unbelievable. And it's passed on, I guess, from generation to generation quite clearly.
Yes.
Virginia, if you were writing the book today, would you do anything different, say anything different?
No, it took me 7 years to write it.
That's amazing.
My mother had to write it in Armenian, her part. We had to tape record it. Then I had to transcribe it and go over the additions and changes. And then, because I learned from the therapist what happened, I made the book parallel of two women, my mother and myself. And I tried to show in the book how my mother's life affected my life.
Now, I'm curious now. Your mother was alive when you were writing the book?
Yes, and I had 2 chapters left, and then she learned she had cancer trachea, and she lived for me to get it published, and she even came to some of my book talks.
So she was, so then I guess, was she actively involved in the writing when you were writing? Were you sharing?
Yes.
Tell us about that process. So you said it was, you were writing in Armenian, then it had to be translated. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, my mother cried a lot when she was writing her part. So I asked Dr. Pitts if I should continue. And he said, crying is therapeutic. It's very good to cry, which I didn't know that before. I thought it was weakness or embarrassment to cry. I always tried to hide my crying. But he said it was very therapeutic, and I learned about that.
It's an amazing story. I'm glad I read it. I mean, I found
Thank you very much.
rewarding. Virginia, what have you found most rewarding about your heritage and life so far? I mean, hopefully you have many more years left.
Thank you. Well, I'm very proud of the Armenians because ancient Armenia was from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And when the Turks invaded it, they took over Armenia. And the air base we have it's called Turkey today, is in Incirlik, which is in Adana, which was Armenian. And ironically, for decades and decades, the Armenian genocide was not recognized because Turkey told the United States, if you recognize it, we won't let you use the air base. And isn't it a coincidence that the air base was in ancient Armenia? I can't get over that.
Now, Turkey, have they ever apologized?
No, they will not. You do not discuss the genocide in Turkey. And in 2000, I can't remember the exact year, they assassinated a journalist, Dink, because he was talking about the Armenian genocide. They will not admit to it. And an interesting anecdote is several years ago, I was at the university having my blood pressure taken, and I had a book signing in the University of Michigan gift shop in the hospital. And I said to the nurse, I wrote a book about the Armenian genocide. And she said, I'm Turkish. I said, where are you from? She said, Palanga. Guess what? That was my mother's village, 50 miles south of the Black Sea. Wow. And I said, have you heard of the Armenian genocide? She said, did it really happen? I said, you're looking at someone whose mother survived it. So they're not teaching it in Turkey.
So they've covered it up. Amazing. Yep. That's why this book is important, and what you're saying is very important as well. Let's go to another topic. And how important a role has music been as part of your adult life?
Oh, music music has been like a partner to me. I mean, instead of marrying, I was addicted to music, and I would go to New York City and see the musicals. I taught at Belleville High School first near Ann Arbor, and then I taught at Washington Junior in Pontiac, Michigan. And we used to put on the musicals, and the students just loved it because they were not exposed at that time. And even when I see my students today, they just run towards me and, thank me for what I did.
That must be a wonderful feeling.
I used to teach music from 7:30, 200 girls in my glee club, teach all day, and then go give piano lessons at the homes of the students.
Virginia, how important a role has religion played in your life?
Oh, a big role. Now, the Methodist missionaries saved my mother. And in her suitcase was a diploma from the orphanage Mesra, 1924, signed by Isabel Harley, who was an Near East American missionary and Cleveland Dodge, who was the chairman of the American Near East Missionary, raised millions in America. They used to feed thousands of orphans at one time. And my mother was very religious, and I believe religion helped her go through all of this. And she sent me to the Methodist Church because the Methodist missionaries saved her.
Virginia, if there are some final thoughts before we sign off about the book, your life, your mother, I'd like you to share them with our viewers now in the last couple of minutes that we have.
I hope people read my book, and I hope it educates them about the history of Armenia and where it is, because Armenia was 600 years before Christ. It was the first Christian nation. And it's sad that people are not familiar with Armenia. Raymond Demajian invented the MRI. He just died, Dr. Ramajian. Many Armenians, William Saroyan. If I have a minute, can I tell what William Saroyan wrote? He was an Armenian.
I know there's a strong Armenian culture here in the Detroit metropolitan area. And Masco Corporation, the Manugian Mansion, which is the mayor's home. So there are many, many others, I'm sure. Virginia, your book, where's it? It's available on Amazon. Where is it available?
Kindle, Amazon Kindle.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful. You've had quite a life story. And again, it's like the Holocaust for Jews. For Armenians, the Holocaust should never be forgotten. I mean, it's hopefully these things will never be repeated. So Virginia Tunian with Orphans in the Sands, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying this morning.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.